Good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar on school indoor air quality, sponsored by AHRI, AHRI, and the PHCC National Association. Obviously, this is an extremely timely topic, and we are very pleased to have a distinguished lineup of speakers today. A school should be a safe place for students, teachers, staff, and visitors. Studies have increasingly shown that air quality and noise levels are key factors in the ability of students to maximize their learning potential. And that was before the COVID situation. America's HVACR and water heating industry, from the equipment manufacturers to the distributors to the installers and maintainers, are committed to providing the technologies that can make schools and all public buildings as safe and health affirming as they can be. We are pleased to have with us today Alex Ayers, Director of Government Affairs for the Heating, Air Conditioning, and Refrigeration Distributors International, or HARDI, who will be discussing the recently passed school funding for indoor air quality and how it will be distributed. Alex has extensive government relations experience, having previously served as Vice President of Public Policy for Schoening Strategies, and also as Executive Director of the Family Business Coalition in Washington, D.C. We are also pleased to have Charles Chip Green, President of Green and Associates Incorporated, mechanical contractors based in Macon, Georgia. Chip has over 30 years of experience working on commercial HVAC and plumbing projects in the educational and medical fields and remains active with institutional markets. Chip served as the 2016 National President of the Plumbing, Heating, Cooling Contractors. And we have Vaughn Smith, National Sales Director for the Engineered Products Division of Bard Manufacturing Company, which focuses on applying products in K-12 projects across the country. Vaughn has over 38 years of experience in commercial HVAC equipment in both the manufacturing and distribution sides. And I'm Francis Dietz, Vice President of Public Affairs for the Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration Institute, or AHRI, the trade association representing HVACR and water heating manufacturers. And it's a pleasure to be moderating and participating in this event. Before we get into the program, I would like to let you know that if you have questions, you can submit them through the Q&A feature, and we will get to as many as we can at the end. We will begin today with Alex, who will discuss the new school funding. Alex?
Thank you, Francis. So I want to start off today really talking about the need for HVAC systems in schools. And this isn't actually an issue that predated the pandemic. A GAO report, so the Government Accountability Office, think of them as a fact-finding investigative service for Congress, released a report last year, but it was really done prior to the pandemic even taking place. And in this report, they actually found that half of all of school buildings in about 40% of all school districts needed to actually fully replace their HVAC systems. About another third needed to update their systems. And really just the fact that so many had outdated building systems that it was leading to things like mold and general poor indoor air quality. So the need for schools with updated HVAC systems and really lighting and windows, doors, roofs, all of this has predated the pandemic. But with the rise of the coronavirus and it's making indoor air quality so much more important, it has become much more important for schools to make updates. And luckily, there's actually some great news for schools that came from Congress. At the end of last year, Congress passed a massive $900 billion stimulus package specifically for coronavirus, and included in that was the elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds. This is $82 billion for schools to use to make general upgrades, everything from personal protective equipment. Think of sneeze guards for kids on their desks. Cleaning supplies, even stuff for the technology side for distance education. All of this was allowed, but one specific of the 14 listed items was HVAC. Specifically, schools can use these funds to inspect, test, maintain, repair, replace, or upgrade their HVAC systems. Basically, anything you can do to an HVAC system to improve indoor air quality is essentially allowed. Everything from mechanical and non-mechanical heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems, air filtering, air purification, general air cleaning, fans, control systems, and then even the windows and doors to help facilitate or ensure indoor air quality as far as air movement is concerned. These are all allowed expenses. Now, I don't want to say just everything is allowed, because I'm sure someone's going to come up with an idea that somehow isn't. But if you're just talking about general HVAC upgrades that will improve indoor air quality, the schools can spend this money on them. So really what we're looking for is making sure that contractors understand that they can go to school districts and tell them, we can improve indoor air quality. We have the technology to do this. You are getting the funds to do it. Let's work together. And so the next step really is talking about how the funds are going to be distributed. So this 82 billion was appropriated to the Department of Education, and they were required by the end of January, so about 2 weeks ago, to give this funding to the individual states. So every state education department has received these funds, and they're going through the process of doing what basically making up applications to get the funding out to schools. And I'll cover the applications later, and it sounds much scarier than it is. The applications really are more of a, do you want this money? Tell us yes, we'll give you the money. So from there, the state education departments, once they release those applications, the local education agencies, these are your local school districts, they will apply for the funding from the states and receive it, and then distribute that to the individual schools within the district. So, the different elementary schools, middle schools, high school, secondary, whatever you want to call it, all will get this funding, and from there can be spent on the various projects. So if you are a contractor, the LEA, the local education agency, which is most likely is going to be your school district, that's the place to start. Now, with that 82 billion, there's a pretty big breakdown then for where this money is going. The requirement was that 90% of all funds have to go to the schools themselves. So this chart shows how much money will be going to the schools. So we took the very publicly available amount of money that each state got and then did the 90% figure. And so you can see on here, they're going to get a pretty good chunk of change. Even the smallest state, which is Vermont, got 114 million for their schools to do upgrades with. That's a pretty big chunk of change. Now, obviously, not all of this money is going to be spent on HVAC. It can be, but it won't necessarily will be. But a fair amount of that probably will, depending on the age and the just how much they need the upgrades. So I want to leave this up for just a few more seconds so people get a chance to look at it. But absolutely, there's going to be funding. I'll put it that way. And this is just this round of funding. So the next step then is, how will these school districts receive it? And now I mentioned that the local education agencies have to apply for the funding. Really what this is saying, do you want this money? Yes or no? Yes. Okay. Tell us what you're going to spend it on, but that has no impact on how much money you will receive. So the reason I say that is because the federal law required that the funding is based on what we call Title I. This is a law passed in, I believe, 1965, and it has a formula in it that says how much money each individual school district or local education agency gets based on a formula, essentially saying, count up every child you have between the ages of 5 and 17 in your jurisdiction, your school district, and tell us how many of them live in a home that is below the poverty level. From that, we know how much money to give you. So, don't worry about, if I overbid this project, they won't be able to get the funding. It's not based on that at all. It is entirely based on the same federal funding that they get otherwise. So they just have to say they want the funding. They have the application. A lot of these applications do say, what are you planning to spend it on? But that's more for the bureaucratic side, not whether it's not a competition in any way. There's no limit on the funding other than what Title I says. So, do tell them what you would expect the costs to be, but don't worry that these costs are going to disqualify the expenses. If you want to get, even more in depth, see what the application itself looks like. If you can, the National Conference of State Legislatures has a great website that lists every state, the links to the applications. Some of them are public. A lot of them are not, because you have to be a school district to apply for it. So really one of the easiest ways to find information about your state is to simply Google ESSER. So the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, #2 funds, and then your state name. And you'll find information from your local state education agency, along with probably this list from NCSL. Now, a lot of what I've talked about has been school districts, which are your typical public schools. Now, in addition to public schools, private schools are also eligible, but it's a little bit different of a process. So under existing federal law, private schools are guaranteed equitable services for any federal dollars. So the money that goes to the local education agency, like I said, was based on the number of children, not the number of students. The reason for this is because there are a certain number that are either taught at a private school or homeschooled and things like that. But that funding is intended for all students, not just the ones in the public school. So a private school can request funding from the local education agency in order to provide equitable services. So, even if you're a private school that brings in students from multiple districts, you can still go to each of those districts and tell them, we have this many students that's from your LEA. We'd like to receive this funds. From there, it gets a little bit more complicated in that you do have to deal with the internal bureaucracy of the local education agency, but federal law requires them to still give equitable services. And the Department of Education has released guidance on this, and it's on the federal website. So if there's questions, let us know and we can direct you to that guidance. And then one unique thing about charter schools, which private, yes, but not private and necessarily like a parochial school, sometimes they are their own local education agency, meaning that they receive the funds directly from the state agency. They don't have to go through a public school district because they're their own LEA. So keep that in mind if you work with any of those types of schools. And then lastly, as I mentioned, this $82 billion isn't necessarily the only patch of funds. Congressman Bobby Scott, he's the chair of the House Education and Labor Committee. He has been talking about the need for HVAC improvements for a long time. And he, with this pandemic was really spurred on. He actually has a bill for $130 billion just to update school infrastructure, which includes lighting, HVAC, and roofing. So it's not unexpected if we get more money later this year. So there's going to be hopefully more bites of the apple. We don't know for sure because it's Congress. We can't always predict what they're going to do. But I think him being a chairman of the committee with jurisdiction gives us a pretty good chance if they pass another stimulus bill that this will be included. Maybe not the $130 billion, but a fair amount of funding. And then to back that up, President Biden has also called for $130 billion in new assistance for schools. So overall, I think there's a pretty good chance that more money will be coming. And with that, I will hand it back over to Francis.
Thanks, Alex. There obviously are many factors that influence the relative health of a school building, but its HVAC system is one of the most important. So what I want to discuss in this segment are what we call our 6 steps to safer schools, the specific ways school building officials can make their schools safer as students and teachers begin to return. A well-designed modern HVAC system, properly installed and maintained, will ensure comfort and productivity while ensuring and enhancing health and safety. Each system component is designed to work in concert with the others to optimize all of those attributes. So the first step is to ensure that your technicians are certified to properly install and maintain this sophisticated equipment. The certification body is North American Technician Excellence, or NATE. It is also important to insist on AHRI certified equipment for product categories that are certified, as that equipment has been tested by third-party labs to perform as advertised. So your customers can be sure they're getting the performance they expect. And in this case, particularly, that is important indeed. Now that we're in our, 11th month of this pandemic, it has pretty much become common knowledge that ventilation is a key piece of the IAQ puzzle. Trying to get that slide up here. Here we go. The CDC has been consistent in its recommendation to increase the flow of air that could be moving particles around, and to provide more outside air in particular to help disperse pathogens. Harvard University's T.H. Chan School of Public Health echoes the CDC's advice, noting that bringing in more outside air in buildings helps dilute airborne contaminants, making infection less likely. It's the same science that informs encouraging meeting and eating outdoors when possible in this time. And a 2019 study in the journal Nature that found that even minimum levels of outdoor air ventilation could reduce transmission of the flu and other viruses to an extent normally associated with a 50 to 60% vaccination rate. So that's very significant. Building engineers also are encouraged to improve the efficiency of the filters serving their HVAC systems. AHRI recommends that mechanical filter efficiency be at least MERV 13 and preferably MERV 14 or better to help mitigate the transmission of infectious aerosols. But while MERV 13 and greater filters are better at removing the particles that are the size of many of these virus particles, many existing HVAC systems were designed and installed to operate using somewhere between MERV 6 and MERV 8 filters. That's important to recognize because higher efficiency filters require greater air pressures to drive or force air through the filter. So care must be taken when increasing the filter efficiency to verify that the capacity of the air handling system is sufficient to accommodate the better filters without adversely affecting its ability to maintain required indoor temperature and humidity conditions. NATE certified technicians have the tools to determine the maximum possible MERV filter for an individual system, and their advice should be heeded, as an inappropriate filter can result in system damage. In addition to filters, there are other technologies that can aid in viral capture, one being UV light treatment and the other being ionization, and there are others as well. Experts such as Dr. Edward Nardell, a professor of global health and social medicine at Harvard Medical School, and Penn State University professor of architectural engineering, William Bonfleth, who also heads up AHRI's epidemic task force, agree that UV light treatment can be beneficial in catching the pathogens that filters let through. As Nardell states, we've done the studies, we know it works. It also works to keep viruses from reproducing, as according to Bonfleth, it mangles the genetic material in pathogens, preventing them from reproducing. Both Nardell and Bonfleth note that even HEPA filters can let some viral particles through, so using UV light treatment to catch those greatly increases levels of protection. Ionization produces a high concentration of positive and negative ions, delivering them to the space via the ventilation system. Within the airstream, ions attach to particles where they combine, becoming larger and more easily filtered from the air. When ions come in contact with pathogens, they disrupt the pathogen's surface proteins, rendering them inactive. Ionization often requires no maintenance or replacement parts, and some models are self-cleaning and feature universal voltage for easier installation. So school building officials might consider ionization as part of a comprehensive indoor air quality program, and they should make sure ionization products have been tested via the UL 867 standard for no ozone admission. Another important factor is humidity control. According to Bonfleth, viruses are least viable in buildings with humidity between 40 and 60%. Schools in cooler climates are susceptible to humidity levels lower than optimal, making humidifiers a necessity in those areas. Proper humidity levels are something for contractors and distributors to keep in mind, as this does not often leap to mind as a preventive measure, but it can be a very important part of an overall IAQ system. So the bottom line is this: contractors should take the time to walk building officials through an assessment by which they conduct tests to determine current system capacity and requirements, as well as appropriate airflows and the amount of outside air coming into a building. Finally, and this is an important point to raise with building officials, it should be understood that a healthy building often involves balances of energy use, comfort, and safety. Some of the remedies we've discussed today can increase energy usage, primarily because they involve running a system more than has been typical. Those increases can be mitigated by installing more highly efficient equipment in those cases where replacement is already imminent or within a couple years of its useful life. A properly installed, properly maintained system with adequate ventilation using outside air, proper filtration, and appropriate humidity control, all of which are accomplished through readily available technologies, can go a long way toward mitigating potential viral spread. Now, I would like to turn to a couple of experts we have with us this afternoon. Charles Green, who goes by Chip, is president of Green and Associates, a Georgia mechanical contractor, and Vaughn Smith, national sales director for Bard Manufacturing Company, both of whom have extensive experience dealing with schools and school building officials. Thank you both for being here. I'll begin with you, Chip. How aware do you think schools are of the newly available federal funding?
So we have been getting calls from school systems around our geographical area, either requesting quotations for to have these systems put in, or in some cases, they are already anticipating the funding and want to know, what kind of budget they need to look for. So we've been hearing from them a lot, and as well as some other government entities other than schools as well.
And how aware, and Vaughn, you can answer this as well. How aware are contractors and distributors of this funding?
Well, to dovetail on to what Chip said, the school district's going to vary in expertise on the availability of these funds, especially if they have a key person that's tracking grants like this, and they're on top of it. There'll probably be some districts that could use some help. Contractors and distributors, if they swim in these waters of school renovations and IEQ products, they may be more aware than others, especially contractors and distributors that handle IAQ products. They're probably more aware than others.
Would you agree with that, Chip?
Yeah, the distributors that represent these products have already been reaching out to us and sharing white papers about the technology and its effectiveness and that type of thing. So definitely like Vaughn said, the players in the market, they're already very engaged in this.
So you would both agree that this is a big opportunity really for contractors and distributors. I mean, can they play a big role in sort of leading folks to this source of funding?
Absolutely. Contractors and distributors really interested in capturing the opportunity where school projects have been sitting for lack of funding. If they can educate themselves and then educate the districts who are busy running their schools and attacking other things, they'll be tied up with PPE and new maintenance routines. Contractors and distributors can really educate them as to here's the things they can do HVAC and building wise to take advantage of this funding.
Mm-hmm. So I'll ask you both, what do you think are some of the biggest needs that schools have now? Is it maintenance? Is it better controls? Is it upgrade of equipment or replacements? Maybe a combination of those?
So I would say the thing that we see is understanding how all the pieces of the system work together. Seems to be what we run into. Say they have a dedicated fresh air system for the building, and it goes out, and then they don't fix it, and then they don't understand why the humidity is high or things worse than that. So that's one of the things we see. The other thing is, and I have written about this, that a lot of times the systems are I don't know how to say it, they're over the level of perhaps the maintenance staff that's going to be looking after them. So I think one thing that the design neighborhood group needs to be aware of is when you're designing a system for a school system, that part of that decision making on what kind of equipment to use needs to be based on the end user and what their capabilities are.
Chip, totally agree. I'd like to dovetail onto that by saying a lot of districts are handed control systems that can do a lot for the system, but nobody understands the system. Some districts who have control experts can utilize all the things the systems can do, but other districts don't have that level of expertise, and they really need something they can handle and maintain. Part of it, what's the biggest needs of the schools? Maintenance is always a need, Francis, but often that's a different pot of money. There's tons of money for upgrades and renovations, but maintenance is neglected. That's always an issue. Easy to maintain is critical for these districts also.
Yeah, my wife teaches at a high school, and she comes home at any given time of the year, and she has either been roasting all day or she's freezing cold. It's very rare that the temperatures are consistent, at least in her part of the building. But that brings up another question. How important is a quality installation from the beginning? And as a follow-up to that, and Chip probably can answer this, how important is ongoing maintenance? We talked about the importance of maintenance, right? But do schools establish maintenance contracts with commercial contractors for this type of thing?
Well, it depends on the school system, and the notes I had made was, size matters. So if you have a large school system, say like Metro Atlanta, for instance, they probably have a pretty good sized maintenance staff that can take care of their various facilities. But what we see, especially outside of Middle Georgia, is that you get into the rural areas where perhaps there's just one or two maintenance people that are responsible for the entire school system. So you can leave the system in great condition when you install the system and it's working great, it's been balanced, it's been tested, and everything is working like it's supposed to. But then if it's just left like that to run on its own, and basics like filters aren't changed, or you don't keep an eye on the belts or whatever, then the effectiveness of the system begins to deteriorate pretty quick.
Yeah. Also, the scheduling, if it's not updated within a couple of years, they're not taking it.
Vaughn, you just went on mute. Mistake there.
Okay, how about, am I back? Great. They do need to maintain their scheduling to take advantage of the efficiencies of the system to set back when it's supposed to, especially ventilation. You only want to ventilate when you need it, where you need it. So maintaining the scheduling and the equipment are both critical.
Good. So let's switch gears here just for a little bit. For the benefit of those watching here, how would you approach a school system? Does it matter how big it is? You both have experience there in dealing with school officials. So I wonder if you could just talk to that a little bit.
Well, what we see is, on a larger school system, you perhaps have a facilities director that is perhaps the decision maker and the individual who can move the needle toward the funding. And then also, depending on the school system, I know here locally, we actually have a separate department in our school system that's responsible for capital projects. So that's also another department that you want to reach out to, depending on which pot of money they're using to do this with. On the smaller school systems, you have to start with the guy who's maintaining the systems every day. And then I would say you want to partner with him to try to take his relationship with whoever the person is responsible for funding in his department, and use that relationship with your expertise to try to go sell these kind of upgrades.
Francis, we have experience with all sorts of sized districts. The really large districts are bureaucratic, and some contractors have success dealing with a regional manager. A district is so big, they have zones, and the zone manager is effective. As you get into intermediate and smaller, maybe it's head of maintenance, maybe it's head of facilities. Sometimes it's the superintendent who wears the hat for all of those. So it really can vary. Some districts have risk managers, and this is the sort of thing risk managers would really have a high interest in.
Mhm. So then what sort of preparation should folks do prior to, say they identify the person they want to talk to? What type of preparation is appropriate before they go in to talk to them? I mean, how much can they learn ahead of time about a school's existing systems? Do they go by the age of the school? If they can't, obviously they can't get inside.
Well, you can, I mean, you can learn a lot about what kind of systems are in the building just by doing a drive-by. I mean, you know, especially like if it's a bar product, you know, those types of units would be very visible on the outside of the building. You know, look for rooftops. You could look for dedicated outside area units. So that would be my initial thing. If you're, you know, if you're not familiar at all with the school system, if you are kind of like us, where you have experience on the building side, and then you want to talk to them about the maintenance side, it's important that internally that we talk to each other, that our service department reaches out to our project managers and those that are responsible for building it, to, you know, what kind of systems do they have, you know, who's doing the controls and that type of thing. And then I would say, you know, thirdly, you know, it's all about relationships. At the end of the day, you got to build the relationships, and it might be a long haul in some instances. You know, you got to get in there and get to know them and understand what their needs are, and then build on that.
Francis, local distributors will have knowledge of the systems they have. Also, the technologies they might be favoring as far as sterilization. So the commercially oriented distributor would be a great source if the contractor does not have any contacts. They may have contacts at the maintenance level, but local distributors could help them on the technologies that are accepted and favored.
So that kind of brings me to, you know, if you don't have a relationship, okay, and you're just basically, you're sort of forced to do a drive-by and figure out, you know, what type of systems they might have. Would you recommend, well, if you can't do a study, are there universal recommendations that folks might give to, you know, school building officials, you know, without knowing their individual circumstances necessarily?
I'm gonna defer to Vaughn on that because he probably has a better handle on that than I do.
Well, Chip, you made a good point earlier. Yeah, universal recommendation one is to, can I help you verify your systems are operating the way they're supposed to, the way they're designed? Is the dedicated outside air system doing what it's supposed to do? Increased filtration is an easy concept to discuss, but then you have to do your legwork of, can your systems handle that increased pressure drop of the filter? An easy question, Francis, to get your foot in the door: are any of your schools having humidity issues? If they are, then you can, that's already creating mold and mildew issues. And now IAQ with the virus, you're helping the virus to live longer, so you can attack that immediately. And the school that's aged out and the equipment's falling apart, that's an easy place to start. Hey, let's come up with a design to get that school renovated.
So once you've discussed sort of equipment issues with folks in schools, how important is it to make them understand or help them understand that once they put in a system, that's just the beginning, and that they have to continually, maintain it, continually have it inspected to make sure that it's running properly. It's sort of like when you buy a car, that's only the beginning. You still got to do your oil changes and, make sure everything's running properly.
What's frustrating to us is on the construction side, we'll build a facility and then we'll say, okay, we carry the first year's warranty. Well, so then just say they're not getting good airflow or doesn't seem to be cooling like it ought to. And you go over there and they call you and say, I got a problem with this unit. And then you go over there and the filters haven't been changed or the coils haven't been cleaned. And so it's frustrating from a new constructor's perspective of, that's not really warranty, that's part of the maintenance. But yet when we on our service department, when they go and approach a client about service and it's a new installation, the first answer is, oh, well, this is a new installation, it's under warranty. So I've got that covered for the first year.
Yeah, Chip, I've had local districts tell us that they're building 3 new schools, but they had to let go maintenance staff because the maintenance budget's getting cut, but the funding for new schools is there. So that's always a pull. And with this funding for IEQ, there's probably some ways for the districts to inject some money to cover additional maintenance. If you're using higher efficiency filters, you're going to have to change them more often. They're more expensive. You're going to have to change them more often. Perhaps they add check filter switches to equipment to give them a heads up. But to address the increased filtration IEQ needs, they're going to have to track these systems more closely than they have in the past.
So we talked earlier in this presentation about, the recommendation to increase ventilation, and that's always a big one. But would you try to make sure that schools understand the potential increased energy costs that go along with that? I mean, how important is that to talk to them about?
I'd like to jump in on this one. This is one of my pet topics, if you will. The increased ventilation is not only energy costs, but they're very quick to point out in the studies that increasing ventilation will also affect the ability of the system to maintain comfort and humidity. So my recommendation out of the gate to any district is to make sure you are ventilating to the system design. Make sure it's ventilating the way it was designed to. Increase it if possible. But another strategy, and I'd like to hear Chip observe if it's how districts would be able to accomplish it, a purge in the morning to flush the building out before there's a load on the building, and also a purge, say, in the afternoon after everybody leaves to flush fresh air through the building. Seems is in a lot of ways more economical and efficient than trying to increase throughout the day.
I mean, that makes sense. There's a resistance to that because, makes the system work harder, especially in this part of the country. We've got I call it the double 90s in September, where we got 90 degrees outside, it's 90% humidity. And even though we're treating that outside air, it gets to be a challenge. So, but even we run into the problem of just getting them to understand the importance of outside air, period. I mean, they'll have a problem with the system and they'll say, oh, well, it's not cooling right. Well, the first thing they do is go to close the outside air damper, which is the worst thing you can do. So it's an education process. the end users got to be educated from the point of design, all the way through to the systems installed about what are they buying, what are they getting, how will it operate, what are they going to have to do on their end, what kind of costs can you anticipate, and what can you do to mitigate those costs, if anything. We did a science building for a university, and we turned it over to them, and they about croaked, and they said, this building is using more energy than any building on campus. And of course it was, current, very up to date, had some of the latest things. And we said, well, yeah, that's to be expected, but they had no idea that that's what they were going to be getting.
So speaking of mitigation, and this is going to be my last question to y'all, trying to mitigate the increased costs, say, of the ventilation and the system working harder, would it be appropriate if it's apparent that a unit is nearing the end of its useful life, or a system is nearing the end of its useful life, to also provide an estimate for a new system, and with calculations for how much you might save because it's much more energy efficient than the system it's replacing, for example?
I think some people really understand that. You can show a payback of 5 years or 10 years or whatever it is, and that makes sense to people. Other people, they just look at sticker shock, and that's as far as you can get them to look. So I guess it just kind of depends on the customer.
Mm-hmm.
I agreed. There are firms out there, energy savings, performance contractors, that will project paying for an upgrade by the energy savings. The best thing the system can do just out of the gate is, when they upgrade to more efficient equipment that will help pay, control it properly, turn it off when it needs to be turned off, ventilate when you should ventilate, don't run the equipment during Christmas holidays. That's anytime they upgrade equipment, try to control it in the most advantageous way also. And that those two together, and asking teachers to take a couple of degrees cooler or warmer helps also.
For instance, the other thing is control technology has really evolved a lot here in the last few years. And so now a lot of control systems are very mobile. You can look at it on your tablet, you can look at it on your phone, and see anything and everything. So I think that's an important feature that when a school system is contemplating what kind of control system to put on, to make sure that it's got those features so that they can see it from anywhere on any device.
That's a good point to bring up, Chip. I want to thank our panelists for a very informative discussion. And I would ask if you guys would stick around, because we have a bunch of questions in the queue here. Thank you. The first question, actually, it's not the first question, it's the latest question. Can the funds be used for upgrading the HVAC on school buses? Any suggestions as to what products might work? Either of you want to take that, or Alex, either one?
Yeah, this is Alex. As far as I know, there is not an ability to use the funds on school buses. I would have to go back and look, but I'm pretty sure it was specifically to buildings.
Okay. And a question, this would be for Alex also. Did DC receive any of these funds? That probably wasn't listed in the states.
Yeah, they did. They got about not quite 160 million. So I just didn't include them because it's a small market. I'm literally sitting at DC now, so it's was not an oversight. It was just the table looked nicer. I'll put it that way.
Okay, I got one more question for you, Alex, and then we got some for the other guys. Are the funds only available to public, or can private schools apply?
And so this goes back to the equitable services. The local education agency, the public school district is who applies. The private school can then go to that local education agency and request the funds. So it's a harder process for private schools, but they're not locked out of the funds by any means.
Okay. Let's see, are any HVAC systems set up to properly, efficiently, and cost effectively operate with filtration levels such as MERV 13 to 14? Won't this cause utility usage to skyrocket, rate of filter change and cost to skyrocket, and ultimately exponentially increase the maintenance, if not outright replacement of the HVAC systems? Wow, so that's quite a question.
I'll start off. Some equipment is sized with the supply blower to handle the additional static of a MERV 13 filter. Yes, the filter changes will be increased, and the pressure drop will increase also. Single package unit, 2 through 5 tons. A lot of these systems have gone DCM motors, so they're very efficient motors already. But yes, there'll be an additional cost. But properly managed, I think the payback in indoor air quality is more than worth it. But that's my opinion as an equipment supplier.
Chip, did you want to weigh in?
I would just say that they just, a user needs to make sure that they do their homework first. You can't take a unit that's, say, a 5-ton air handler that is designed for residential light commercial and just stick a MERV 13 filter in and expect it to operate, because it likely will not. So it's important that before they run out and do that they get some help doing some homework to make sure that the equipment they've got is capable of handling it. And if not, then yes, it's likely that they will have to make some upgrades to their equipment to handle the additional pressure loss across the filtration.
Right. Okay. I got a couple questions here about duct cleaning. This questioner said most schools have neglected cleaning ductwork, and when you increase airflow through the existing ductwork, you can cause debris to be dislodged and negatively affect indoor air quality. So they wanted to know what your thoughts are on duct cleaning as being an advantageous part of the improvements. And then another question was, is that a service that is considered for this funding?
I don't have any experience with duct cleaning. Alex might can tell us if that's part of the funding.
Yeah, I would say it's part of the funding because it fits into the maintenance side of HVAC. Maintain is definitely one of the allowed uses. So I don't see why duct cleaning wouldn't be included.
Well, she would like to think that if they've kept their filtration up, that ought to be minimized, but it can be an issue.
Alex, I have one for you. Does the funding have a time deadline that the money needs to be used by? And are the projects subject to prevailing wages?
So it's a little bit of a complicated question. States are required to give out the funds within 12 months. It doesn't say how much from the federal level, how long schools have to spend that money, but it's entirely possible for states to put that. They might interpret that 12 months as being the school has it as well. It's up to the individual state to decide that. As far as prevailing wages go, that one's not, I don't know enough about contract and union law when it comes to schools. They don't have the exact same regulations to follow as say a federal project. So I don't know on that one.
Okay. Here's a question for Chip and Bond. Do you believe schools are replacing or prepared to replace complete HVAC systems or just quick fit solutions?
I think if the funding's there, they're prepared to get the most bang for their buck they can get. And if they have the opportunity to, say a school is 20 or 25 years old, and it's got the opportunity to upgrade to today's technology, I think that they would seize the opportunity. At least that's the experience that we've experienced.
I agree. There are probably some projects that have been postponed because of funding that they can now go forward on. A brand new school, I don't know if you'd call it a quick fix or just an upgrade. It'd be hard. You've got equipment less than 5 years old. You're certainly not going to replace it, but you could use any number of technologies to improve the IAQ.
Mhm.
And we've all heard stories of schools with issues prior to this. Mold and mildew is one you hear of often. Certainly that school could get moved to the top of the list to improve that HVAC system.
Vaughn, here's a question for you. We talked about earlier how important it is for contractors to do an assessment of a school. And this questioner wants to know if there is an assessment that contractors can use to identify needs and provide findings. Like, is there a sort of a template, if you will?
I'm not aware of a template. You could create one, ventilation, filtration, humidity control, but then the template's going to vary to the type of systems they have. A big central system, the verification of those would be a lot different than smaller systems for each classroom, but some of the basics would be the same.
Mm-hmm. Okay. One questioner wants to know, how have contractors increased their workforce to accommodate the demand?
Well, there's a news flash out there in case anybody's missed it, that skilled trades is filling those jobs is challenging at times. The thing that we're trying to do internally is to train our own, and because the days of being able to find a qualified craftsman that's already experienced, that knows what to do, is tough at best. And so if you can grow your own, so to speak, I think that's your best option.
Okay. Person wants to know about how important, or how, if the bidding process that many schools have could be an impediment to rapid deployment of some of these, not only systems, but, components of systems, UV light, ionization, ventilation, that sort of thing. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
So this is my drum to beat. It's extremely frustrating that many school systems and just government entities in general don't do a good job of pre-qualifying their contractors. So, that's the thing that we encourage more than anything else. Everybody needs competition, and I understand that, but do you understand a chill water system? Do you understand equipment with ECM motors on it? That type thing. Something that gives some assurance to the owner that whoever he receives a bid from, that whoever gets selected, he has some kind of assurance that they're capable of doing what he needs done.
That would certainly be my advice to any school district. We are, we have excellent design engineers designing these systems and skilled sales agencies bidding the projects. But at the end of the day, you're beholden to who does the installation. And to Chip's point, if you're skilled and have experience, you're going to have a good installation. And if it's a new technology and you've never done this before, then you're going to struggle. But the owner's got to live with it for the next 15 years. So quality installation and a skilled contractor at the end of the day is going to decide how well the school district benefits from the new system they get.
Which is, why we put that first in our, 6 steps. But this is a good question here. What's the best way to discuss IAQ options with engineering firms. We have multiple school boards in Florida that have gotten stuck with IAQ, waiting on engineers.
That's a good question. Not knowing what the bottleneck is, I would suggest educating them. Zoom meetings, or now as we're doing right now, this is the wave of the future, but educate the school districts. If the owner is going to the engineer, they're certainly going to, the engineer will then find time if their customer is asking, I want you to look into this equipment or this technology, and reach out to the engineers to make sure that they're educated. Engineers always want to be informed. That's their job, is to provide their informed expertise. So they need to know.
And one of the ways that we've done that in AHRI, when we want to talk to, specifying engineers about the importance of certified equipment, is we've done lunch and learns. Now, of course, these days it may be a little tougher to do that. You may have to do a, at your home office desk lunch and learn, but still, it is a good way to reach those guys, and we've done that before. A questioner wants to know, how is the supply chain for parts for HVAC installation and upgrades? Like, are there any shortages? And I think they're probably referring to, there have been some supply chain issues this past year because of the pandemic. And then they also want to know, what is a good source for HVAC professionals? And maybe Hardy and PHCC might have something to say about that.
So we haven't experienced any true part shortage. There are some. Maybe something as drastic as a coil or something like that that takes a little while to get. But speaking specifically about Vaughn's equipment, we've had a few things here and there on jobs that we've done, and no more than a few days or maybe a week to get a specific part. And then if it's a generic part, then it's usually available at your local distributor. So not too bad. Equipment, new equipment is probably a little bit more challenging than parts, I would say.
Okay. I have time for one more quick question. Do you see an issue of proper sizing of equipment once ventilation is connected?
Absolutely. Sizing is always critical when ventilation is involved. Ventilation can be anywhere from a huge load in the summer to a neutral load in a shoulder season in spring and fall. So the equipment should be sized to handle the ventilation and also the load of the classroom, and not necessarily separately, but through the entire school year. The system is going to be designed to handle summer design, which is when it's really hot outside, but that's 3 to 15 hours a year. The system's got to operate the rest of the year also. So yeah, sizing is an issue. The skilled sales agencies in your area, folks who do the work, contractors involved in that work, will know from experience the things you need to do.
One thing,
yeah, go ahead.
See is it's your size for a classroom of 20 to 25 kids, and but maybe it's a small school and they only have 15 kids in there, or perhaps they only have a full class in there an hour or 2 hours a day. There's got to be some way to adjust for that, variable speed or just something so that you can accommodate the load up or down when you need to. And then the other thing is, which was one of your points, is humidity control, because some people just say, well, I got good cooling, that's all I need. But the humidity piece is very, very important to having proper ventilation in the classroom or any other facility.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add, Francis, most of all the designers have gone through a painful learning curve with the increased ventilation for the past 20 years, but they've learned how to do it, but controlling the system properly and giving a system to the owner that they can control going into the future, 3 years down the road, is critical to make sure the system does what it was designed to do.
So very quickly, does that make the case for zone controls?
I'm personally a fan, and you know, zone control can be done, you know, any number of ways. You could be, you know, individual units for, you know, different areas. It could be a central system with VAV boxes. There's a number of ways that you can say that you're doing zoning, but I think it's absolutely critical that it be considered on a facility, just because, you know, no two people have the same comfort level, and so that needs to be taken into account.
Right.
One little sales pitch, Francis, our system is zone control, 1 unit per classroom.
I thought you might chime in there, Vaughn. Okay, that's all the time we have today. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And I want to thank our panelists. Really provided a lot of good information. I want to let you know that we'll be sending a copy of the slides. And if you asked a question we didn't get to, we will follow up with you individually. So thank you again for joining. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.